Hi, welcome to another issue of Counterpunch with Trevor Loudon, the show that details the rapidly unfolding world communist revolution. Please like the show, share the show, subscribe to Epoch TV. Today's episode is why Joe Biden will not really defend Ukraine. I expect to get some pushback for this, but I urge people to do their own research, and I think my conclusions will bear out. We need to understand right off the top that modern Russia is an extension of the Soviet Union. Vladimir Putin is not a leader as traditionally think of as in the West. He is chosen by the real leaders, the heads of intelligence services, the underground communist networks, etc. He was chosen the same way that Gorbachev was chosen, or Andropov was chosen, or Brezhnev was chosen. This is not a crazy man seeking personal power. This is a man chosen by the elites of his country to lead the world into war, a war of conquest, what they believe will be the final push to establish world communism on the planet. So what we're seeing in Ukraine is not just to gain a bit of territory, it is the first kinetic step of World War III. We've been in World War III since World War II, but now it's going to start to go more kinetic because the forces of Russia and China realize that NATO is very divided and the United States is the weakest it has been in decades. This is the time to make the push, especially before the midterm elections in 2022, which will probably return more conservative Republicans to power in the US Senate and the US Congress, and would put a lot of damper on Biden's foreign policy, etc. Think about it. Would Vladimir Putin or Russia do what they have done and set the whole world against them almost, if this was just for a little bit of land in Ukraine, or this was to make sure Ukraine doesn't join NATO? Now I think they're going for the whole enchilada. They will attempt to take Ukraine, then the Baltic states. That will put them on a collision course with the United States and NATO. At that point, I think America could be forced into a war which it's very ill-equipped to fight right now, or it will be basically forced to cede the world balance of power to Russia and China. That's what we're facing right now, and that will mean the inevitable advance of world communism and the defeat of freedom around the world. That's what we're looking at. So why do I think Biden won't make a stand? Why do I think Biden won't defend Ukraine? Well, he had the opportunity to do it earlier. He okayed Russia supplying Germany with energy. That put Ukraine at a big disadvantage. It made Germany, the strongest European country in NATO, dependent on Russia. Biden helped that. He signaled to the world that a small incursion into Ukraine would not meet a military response. That was all the green light the Russian leadership needed to go into Ukraine.
And it depends on what it does. It's one thing if it's a minor incursion and then we end up having a fight about what to do and not do, etc.
He has put some sanctions on. There's been some sanctions coming up from America, very reluctant, most of them. Biden has now finally banned the importation of Russian oil into America, but he wants to get that oil instead from Iran and Venezuela, which are both allied to Russia. So he'll deny the communists revenue on one hand, and he'll give the allies of the communist revenues on the other. Send his executive orders effectively shut down a lot of American energy production. Under President Trump, America was energy independent and could export energy to Europe. It could basically help Ukraine or help Europe so that Russia couldn't really blackmail them or have the influence that it does today. Well, that all went away under Biden. So now America is dependent on getting energy from its enemies. Europe is dependent on getting energy from its enemies. This is a very, very important thing. But let's look at Biden's background a bit. He was sold as a moderate Democrat. But if you really look at his past, it has been anything but moderate, especially on foreign policy. He was one of the most left-wing senators in the United States. When Reagan was trying to stop communism in the Soviet Union, Biden was going to visit Soviet leaders. When Reagan was trying to stop communism in Latin America, Biden was one of his biggest opponents. It was Biden, John Kerry, and Ted Kennedy that opposed Reagan most staunchly in the US Senate. When it comes to foreign policy, Biden has always been on the far left. A little bit further back in history, in 1972, Biden was a 29-year-old city councillor in Wilmington, Delaware. He decided to run for US Senate against a 4-term Republican incumbent with an 80% approval rating in a state that had never elected a Democrat statewide at that point. You'd think that would be a suicide mission. But Biden won because he had the backing of a very important but very shadowy group called the Council for a Livable World. Look them up online. They're still there right now. They are still calling for disarmament, American disarmament. They're still electing US senators and congressmen. They've endorsed several for this upcoming election. But they are the people who got Biden elected. And the president of the Council for a Livable World in 1972, the man who personally got behind Biden, got him money, got him endorsements, got him volunteers, got him elected, was a very corrupt senator from Tennessee called Albert Gore Sr. We've all heard of his son, Al Gore Jr., who stood for US president in 2000 and apparently invented the internet and global warming. But anyway, Albert Gore Sr. was a senator from Tennessee. At that time, he was president of the Council for a Livable World. And he regarded Biden as a very promising, progressive young man. Well, Albert Gore Sr. was the protege of a man called Armand Hammer. Armand Hammer was a very wealthy businessman, the head of Occidental Petroleum. He was the son of an American Communist Party member, Julius Hammer. Armand Hammer was regarded in many circles by the FBI as the leading Soviet agent in America right through the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. He was Moscow's man in America. He helped to keep the Bolshevik Revolution alive, and the FBI was always trying to shut him down, but Albert Gore Sr. protected Armand Hammer from the FBI from his position in the US Senate. So effectively, Joe Biden got his job because of the protege of a Soviet agent. But if you look at the Council for a Livable World, it was set up in 1962 by a man called Leo Szilard, a Hungarian. He was a supporter of Bela Kun's communist revolution, which broke out in Hungary just after World War I. When that failed, Szilard came to Germany, then the United States. He became a top nuclear physicist. He was one of the senior men in the Manhattan Project, the super secret project that developed the atomic weapon that was used to defeat Japan after World War II. And it was full of communists. Leaking like a sieve, they gave America's atom bomb secrets to the Soviet Union. Anyway, after the war, Leo Szilard became an international peace campaigner. He participated and set up the famous Pugwash conferences, where Soviet scientists and politicians would mingle with Western leftists, and it was all about peace and disarmament, but mainly American disarmament. Because the Soviet goal was then, as it is now, to disarm America so the Soviets could defeat America in a nuclear exchange or blackmail the United States into surrender. In 1962, Szilard sets up the Council for a Livable World. It was a PAC. It got some money and it started funding candidates. Almost all Democrats, the occasional left-wing Republican, but almost all Democrats. And they targeted small states, targeted Senate races in small states, because senators negotiate treaties. They're very, very powerful people. And you can elect a US senator for very little money in a small state like Rhode Island or New Hampshire or Vermont or Maine, etc. And that's where they focused. Well, it was revealed in 1994 by a man called Pavel Sudoplatov, a former top-ranking Soviet intelligence officer under Stalin and the spy chief Beria, that Leo Szilard was a fully recruited Soviet agent, and that he'd been told to stop his spying because he could get caught, the FBI was on his tail, instead use his political influence to work for US nuclear disarmament to the advantage of the Soviet Union.
The Council for a Livable World has been able to influence US defense policies for decades. The Council also claims to have influenced several major arms limitation treaties signed with the Soviet Union or Russia, all of which benefited Moscow and damaged the United States. But is this just boasting? How successful has the Council for a Livable World actually been?
From ratifying the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty and START to establishing a nuclear testing moratorium here at home, to the Chemical Weapons Convention, and to this very day, your support and guidance during our recent effort to ratify New START.
So even today, Joe Biden is still working with the Council for a Livable World. He recently appointed Alexandra Bell from the Council to the position of Deputy Assistant Secretary of State in the Bureau of Arms Control. He appointed Mallory Stewart, another Council operative, as Senior Director for Arms Control on the National Security Council. He appointed Spencer Boyer as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Europe and NATO Policy. He appointed Anthony Weir as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State in the Bureau of International Security and Non-Proliferation. And he also appointed Colin Carl as Under-Secretary of Defense for Policy. All of these positions are involved with disarmament, weakening the United States military, right at the time when the United States needs to be standing up to Russia and China. These are the people that Joe Biden has been appointing.